Direct from our newsroom in Washington, in color, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
1968 was tragic, but some good had to come from it. So much pain, and you can clearly see the community was in grief. They say the more things change, the more they stay the same. There's got to be more to the story, right? I've got to go find out.
Every year, a very special kind of selection takes place that is important to everyone who appreciates the value of DC's history and culture. It happens quietly but powerfully. It's the DC Humanities Council's careful selection of grantees for the DC Community Heritage Project in partnership with the DC Historic Preservation Office. This is a showcase for the committed individuals and the dynamic organizations actively working every day to protect, communicate, and engage new minds in discovering the fabulous cultural tapestry of our nation's capital. Indeed, we can't choose a powerful future without a deep appreciation of the history and the expression on which we stand, without a love for the people we call neighbors and the places we share as home. The work of several of this year's DC Humanities Council grantees is exciting at a time when so much is at stake. It's great to see the kind of work that these organizations have undertaken.
It's crazy how so much chaos could be captured in one single painting. It reminds me of the stories my father used to tell me about growing up near U Street back in the day, during the riots.
Our 1968 project is an opportunity to gather together recorded interviews with residents that survived the 1968 riots, with archival footage and photographs and footage of what Shaw looks like today, to provide a perspective on how the dynamic neighborhood that we're in 2018 could not have been possible without the devastating effects of the 1968 riots, but also with an appreciation for what was lost and the opportunity to make sure that people today understand that there was great sacrifice that took place in order to create today's thriving neighborhood. The project is important in that it will allow anyone to be able to magically be transported back to 1968 to actually feel what it was like to be in the midst of the bedlam that was taking place there, surrounded by the sounds and the sights of 7th Street in 1968. People don't have an appreciation of just how traumatic that incident was, and I think it's important for folks to have context. Everybody's heard about the 1968 riots. Only people that lived through it really understand how devastating they were.
I'm very much concerned about the history of the city and enabling people who, especially people who've lived here a good time, to be able to tell a story. Photographers who were involved in 1968, some of whom have passed on. Also doing oral histories of people who were here during that time and remember the spring of 1968. I'm almost 77 years of age, and so people who were during that particular time, same age as mine, might be talking about their work experiences, etc., or the impact of the so-called riots that took place after Dr. King was killed. There are a lot of other things that happened that people would want to talk about. Well, a lot of people came to the city, camped out on the mall, and then in June 24th, I think it was the date, they had something called Solidarity Day, which was a gathering of folks, of people that surrounded the reflection pool on that day. So thousands of people were involved in that particular marching demonstration. And to this day, there are people who continue to fight for the same things that Dr. King spoke of back in 1968. And it's not necessarily only about Resurrection City, although that was a major character, let's say, in the play during that time. But there are a lot of other things that happened that people would want to talk about. So that spring of 1968 was a significant year.
Over the course of time, we've lost some of our history, and so while people that were in the area and at the high school can still remember a lot of the exciting things, good, bad, or indifferent, that happened in 1968, I wanted to get it documented for those that come behind us. We chose to title it The Leap Year That Changed the World, to provide an opportunity for students, community, and faculty to actually document some of the memories that they had of the school and of their time in the community and in the school during that pivotal year in our nation's history. What we want to achieve, that the community as well as the current students actually understand the importance of Paul Laurence Dunbar High School during that leap year of 1968, the effects that the events of the year had on the students, and how we hope to preserve those memories and share the information with the future students as well as our new neighbors in the community of the school.
The Soul Tent itself is symbolic of Resurrection City and the Poor People's Campaign. So it's specifically bringing up that history and what happened after MLK was killed, and the incredible movement of people in Washington, D.C. that came to participate in Resurrection City. Resurrection City was May 12th through June 24th approximately in 1968, and over 3,000 people camped on the mall for that time. It rained a lot, and the narrative in the media is that it was largely unsuccessful. So part of the project is to bring up the stories and the actual successes of that movement and the Poor People's Campaign. Again, it is an A-frame structure, symbolic of the residential structures that were used at Resurrection City, designed by Wiebesen and his team of architects from Howard University. So the wood structure travels to different neighborhood libraries. It also has been requested to be on the National Mall. Some visitors look at it and kind of smile and say, oh wow, that's really interesting, and then just keep walking. And others really engage with the content. It's designed so for people to enter the space and sit down and listen to recordings. We have a collection of recordings that are actually on loan from the Library of Congress American Folklife Center that were done by a gentleman named Bruce Jackson at Resurrection City in 1968. We want residents of Washington, D.C. to come away knowing more of the history of the Poor People's Campaign. It's not a story that's often told.
I guess the world still has to go on, even though you have this tumultuous event going on. Even though the world around them was in turmoil, these kids had and used dance as a way of comforting them. It was part of their social activity. It was a part of their social development. And it was just something that they looked forward to. Tina Rama was the jewel of Washington, D.C. during the 1960s. We created a program in partnership with the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum. There was a screening of the documentary dance party, the Tina Rama Story, what was going on around them here in Washington, D.C. as young people, and what they thought about the civil rights movement and the death of Dr. Martin Luther King, and how it affected them and their families and their day-to-day lives. The teenagers had to go through neighborhoods where buildings were burning.
A lot of people came from down south, and they were tented all downtown, and you could smell the smoke with the tear gas in it all over the neighborhoods. And I was 17 when Martin Luther King got killed, and I could feel a premonition that whole week of something bad was going to happen. Mm-hmm. Our life changed, you know, from happy-go-lucky going to school to the National Guard telling you can't go across the bridge. We couldn't even get on the bus.
We were able to hear so much about their thoughts on the civil rights movement. I mean, we're talking young people at the time who were ages 13 through 17 years old. They went from, you know, music of lovey-dovey and let's do the jerk and the twine and whatnot to We're a Winner by the Impressions, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud by James Brown, Message from a Black Man by the Temptations. They now understood Black pride, Black power, and that the era of segregation was breaking up, and they were the main generation that was going to be affected by it, and I think that they understood that. You know, I started research on that in 1998, and to this day, I'm still learning a lot about the era of the Tina Rama Dance Party.
Deanwood is a historic neighborhood. There are lots of people who have lived there for years, and we figured they were a good resource for telling us how the businesses were impacted after the riots of '68. The business owners aren't necessarily the original business owners, but a lot of them are the children and grandchildren of the original business owners. A lot of the residents have been there for years, and they know what used to be there and how it used to be and what they would like it to become. And so we are taking advantage of that history, those history resources. We're inviting the community to come in a sort of a roundtable discussion, and we're also doing a video of comparison of how the buildings looked, what used to be there, with pictures of businesses that have gone away, but another business with a different name has come in their space. Deanwood is an underserved community. It has been for a long time, but historically, people always remember how it used to thrive and, you know, be a much better community, a much better business community, and how it's gone down over the years. A lot of the buildings were built by African American architects back who were there in the 50s, and people don't know the significance of the houses that they own. And people who live in those spaces, you know, cherish them. They, you know, you can walk, you can take your kids out to play, you can walk your dog. You know, it's a feel that they want to keep. You know, a lot of young people operate under the notion that the world began when they began. There are a lot of grandchildren who are moving back into our community, back into their parents' and grandparents' homes, and they have no clue what Deanwood used to be, or how it used to look, or how it changed, and when it changed, and why it changed.
The intersection between all the activities of 1968 in Washington, D.C., the assassination of Dr. King, impacted Wilson somewhat because the students who came from across the park were actually exposed to that riot. In 1968, they moved the boundary from west of Rock Creek Park over to east of Rock Creek Park down to 16th Street and Northwest. That would have had students coming as far north as Silver Spring, Maryland, as far south as Columbia Heights. We saw in 1966 there were 7 African American students. Now, it's not to say that Wilson was all white, because the children of ambassadors also attended that school. So it was a multicultural environment. However, African Americans were not there. We went from, in 1966, having only 7 African Americans. By the 90s, there was close to 70% African American environment, and now it's still a majority environment. From what I've heard from alumnus from that era so far, is that being able to go to school with people of different races really helped their ability to deal in the world, being more empathetic and understanding of each culture. As we're going through gentrification at this point through our city, and there's so many whites who have come to live in what was Chocolate City, they will see that they don't have to push all their children to attend Woodrow Wilson High School, that there is a great possibility and an opportunity to mix with all the students of all colors in this city. There's a richness in students of all colors and adults of all colors coming together as a community that I hope that they walk away with understanding that in this day and time we should not reverse how far we've come, but rather continue in this expansion of integration and desegregation and cultural history.
I've been fortunate enough to be the resident artist at Mr. Henry's now going on 3 years. To be in the room where we perform, the room that we will perform in was actually built for Ms. Roberta Flack to perform in altogether. This room that is bringing in multi-generational, interracial audiences, people who don't look like each other, in just for the love of the music. 50 years ago when she was hired, I would say, that same thing is happening right now. Washington, D.C. had an opportunity to really watch her dream come true, and it started there at Mr. Henry's. There is a board that was used to board up Mr. Henry's during the riots. It said, "Soul Brothers work here. Don't burn it down, don't touch us." And they didn't. So I've had an opportunity so far to speak with other musicians, people who were seniors in high school at Howard University, who were raising families and also who were going to see shows. Seeing how it impacted them so greatly, and it shaped the way their lives were going to go. As I say a lot of the times, people may not see your dreams, they can watch them come true. What she means to the District of Columbia in 1968 is still as impactful as it is right now. You go anywhere in Washington, D.C., you're still hearing her music being performed, and the people who are listening to others cover her songs at shows can still remember when she was performing this stuff live at Mr. Henry's upstairs in a room that was built just for her. You can't beat that.
They say it was a massively violent time, but really, it was a violent action that led to tragic outbursts that pulled all the focus. There are still people fighting the good fight.
What an amazing blend of deep historical legacy, contemporary art and culture, and a totally plugged-in future. Funding these winning dimensions of the DC experience for DC and for the world that comes to experience Washington is the ongoing work of the DC Humanities Council. Learn their work and find out how you too can contribute and get involved. Thank you for your time.
Are you trying to stop them from seeking peace of mind? Is there something that you think they have to hide? Never comes unhindered. He wants to live just like you. Chances appear but so few. But for the luck of the draw, you could be in his place. Do they just seem like some urban decoration, or just another smell that makes your day so hard? You never think, you never thought about the fact that you stepped over life and rest on something made of stone. He wants to live